topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the host and their guests, and not those of W4CS Radio, its employees, or affiliates. W4CS makes no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for listening to the Cancer Support Network on W4CS.com.
Welcome everyone. It's Arthi with Light Up Your Life, and it's Friday, and it's a whole new month of September, and I'm sure all of you are noticing the differences in the weather already, and my continued heart goes out to those who are affected by the weather and things that are happening around our world. I sound like a running record when I repeat myself, but when we start off every show, just make sure that you are kind to yourself, take some space and time. The more that I do research and I look into things, the actual art of taking rest is so crucial. And that is as simple as just closing your eyes in the middle of your day, as we've talked about in the past, to just taking a few minutes of rest and reprieve, even if you're in your office, if you can shut your door, turn off the lights, and even just take a few minutes to breathe. If it's anything we can say about the last 2 years, we just need to be kind and gentle with ourselves. The rat race will always continue, and we somehow get stuck in a cyclical cycle. So just remind yourself to be very cautious of not, if you get there, to take yourself out of the equation. Today's episode, I actually I'm excited about this topic as well, for so many reasons. Empathy is a huge component of what I think is an essential ingredient to all relationships. It's a missing ingredient to how we operate in our familial structures, our community structures, and our global structures. But the more that we talk about it, and the more that we empower with the discussion of empathy, the more that I think we can start to incorporate it. So today's guest is Dr. Kristen Donnelly, and I'm really excited about having her come on, because you can tell her passion for this is so huge. So Kristen is a social worker. She's a researcher. She has her clinical doctorate that she can talk about all of the extensive work that she does in research. She's a TEDx speaker, international empathy educator, and Kristen hugely believes in empathy and the intersection with inclusivity. And we'll be discussing that today too, because these are essential ingredients, of course, that we need to integrate into our worlds. Kristen is also one of the founders of Good Doctors of Abbey Research, and I'm so excited to hear about her work. And today's topic is called Getting Brainy About Empathy and Emotion-Based Intelligence. Just to remind you all, let's stop focusing so much on the IQ and let's start focusing on the EQ. And so I feel like Kristen is a great person to have on to start getting us to get into the EQ more. So welcome, Kristen.
Oh my gosh. Hello, Arthi. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. I usually try not to look at my notes, but I didn't want to miss anything about your intro.
You're fine.
So, Kristen, can you talk a little bit about your background? Because, you do have a background in social work. Of course, now a lot of your work is in research, but can you kind of share your journey of how you professionally, and I always know there's a personal story, so I'm not even it's going to be in there. So if you could share with me and the audience kind of that story with us.
For sure. I'd be delighted. So I was raised in an entrepreneurial family, which is a really important part of this story. So we've owned a network of companies for about 30 years, and they do a lot of different things. We mostly manufacture stuff, except until a couple of years ago, and I'll get to that. But our mission statement as a family is to impact lives and create wealth. And that wealth is holistic. It's emotional and financial and social and psychological and all of those things. And so my whole life has been driven around those 5 words. So I spent a little bit of time answering that kind of calling and being that in, as you said, social work. I was a community organizer, community practitioner. I was a youth worker for a long time. I was a college professor for a little bit. And kind of all along the way, knowing that that my deepest passion was to help people be the best versions of themselves. And that all of us need help doing that because none of us really know how to human. Like none of us know what we're doing. So we all have to figure it out together. And so when I did my PhD actually in sociology, and so I did research on my particular area of focus is women and religion. I'm very fascinated with that intersection and how those things play together. And I did it in Northern Ireland. And while I was there, I picked up a best friend and a husband. And at the end of my PhD, my husband and I were trying to figure out, he's a Northern Irish citizen. We were trying to figure out where home could be for us. And my brother had started working for the family business manufacturing firm full time at that point. And he said, well, what if you moved home and we tried to do HR from a social work perspective? Do you think you could do that? And I was like, yeah, let's give it a run. We're an intentional second chance employer in our labor force. So all you have to do to work with us is to show up sober every day and on time. We'll teach you everything else you need to know. But that, of course, comes with some things that, when you're working with folks who have made poor decisions and who have had very poor decisions made for them, there's a lot of, it's so funny. We would have people say, well, we're going to give everybody, here's an app that you can use to do everything. We'd be like, well, half our employees don't have smartphones. We're still doing paper checks because up until earlier this year, a lot of the people that we have historically worked with didn't want to have a bank account, so there's a lot of the nuancy stuff around that. And we were like, okay, let's try the social work instead of HR. Let's figure that out. So moved home and did that. And then at the same time, I realized that I could take this honestly world-class training that I have in listening, analysis, education, teaching, all of these things, and serve the marketplace. There's a lot of these skills that we keep in academia and we don't really ever use and let leave.
That's the truth.
So it just makes me furious because what good is it doing there? So I started a company called Abbey Research underneath the network of family companies, and our way of impacting lives and creating wealth. And then I hired my best friend to do it. Her name's Dr. Erin Hinson. Alongside with me, our way of doing that is empowering and educating inclusive communities. In communities that try to be inclusive, because none of us have gotten there yet. So we're all working it out. We're all figuring it out together. And so in the middle of, kind of still wearing this HR-ish hat and starting that company, my dad had a really significant health event. And it shifted our family dynamic to where my brother and I were someday maybe going to take over the business, hypothetically in the future, to, okay, we're taking it over imminently. My dad's still with us and he's great. But it was very touch and go for a little while. And so tangentially, a dream of I will do this someday became the center of my life. And so everything became about, okay, how do we continue this legacy, still live within the calling that I've been given? How do my brother and I work together? How do we do all of these things? And the transition from HR to COO and co-owner taught me so much about empathy and so much about how to ask better questions and how to be gentle with myself and how to also stand up for myself. And I always say I'm a woman who's been in ministry, academia, and manufacturing. I know I've hung around with a lot of dudes, and it's been one of the things I've been doing for a long time. So Abby Research has grown, which has been great. And Erin and I now spend a lot of time talking to wonderful folks like you about how do we shift our understanding of empathy. The last 2 years have really taught us that empathy can't be an emotional reaction to things. Empathy truly is an intellectual decision. It's an intellectual posture. It's how you move through the world. And if we keep telling people that empathy is only emotional, our fear, and we've seen this happen, is people are like, oh, well, I'm not very emotional. I don't know how to do that, so I don't need to be empathetic. And we're like, cool. But also, it's not emotional. Primarily, it's a decision. We can all make decisions. We all have the power to do that. So let's figure out how to be curious about ourselves and the people around us. And that's empathy. So let's keep going and doing that. So that's it in a nutshell. Now I spend my days helping people be curious, like I said, about themselves, the world around them, how all of those things interact. And then I also help my brother manage the massive, like the network kind of 35,000 foot view of all of the companies as they go together, which continues to teach me about empathy every single day. And we're located, I should say, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So that's where home is.
Oh, wow. Well, a couple things resonated. Well, more than a couple. My husband always teases me because I use couple like as in like more than two. He's like, no, it's two and a few is more than. So I'm trying to train my brain, like, because I've always used couple as a slang, So, a few. Sorry, a few things that struck me are that you are describing empathy as a brain-based decision, which is what which I just love that today's segment is called brain-based, because it is a brain-based decision. So I love that you are helping people realize it is not an emotional based, it is a brain-based. And the fact is that it does, once you raise your EQ, then don't you feel like you raise your IQ that everyone's so concerned about?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And even if you don't raise the IQ, I'll be really honest, the more I'm out in the workforce, the EQ is the thing that matters. And the more employers I talk to and the more, employees I talk to, we can train you to do just about everything else in the workforce. Somebody else can, or we can, but we can't train you how to be a good person.
True that. True that. That is so true. I mean, and essentially, if you look at how much of our time we have spent on IQ, and you have brilliant people, but then when you find that they are feeling like they don't have those interactional skills, they do feel like they have a deficit that impairs them from truly being authentically happy. I see it all the time. I see it all the time. You see where people have so many, like you said, so many of the puzzles figured out with wealth, but then they haven't figured out in wellness wealth, like where is it that I'm actually lacking? And it's they're relational. The relational piece is missing for a lot of these folks.
Yeah. And the other thing too is that when you have that deficit, the emotional relational piece, you've frequently been taught your whole life that is someone else's problem and not yours. And so you just continue to be a square peg in a round hole and have no concept of how to solve your own pain. And so you frequently continue to lash out at the people around you and create more emotional deficit. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way that's helpful for no one.
Totally. And I also want to really say that I love the fact that the entrepreneur piece for you came so early, where it is a family. Like when I was kind of just reading a little bit about you, the fact that you and your brother are just continuing to expand, your dad, like how entrepreneurship in families looks, because that was a huge piece of even our industrial revolution, when people would follow footstep in their family. I think we stepped away from it a little bit. And now I think, like you said, I'm trying to figure out the pieces where I include that. It's still part of your story, which I want to remind people, you can easily make parts of your family's legacy. All of that comes under the umbrella of entrepreneurship, I feel.
Oh yeah. My brother and I will frequently tell people, we're not 100% positive that in 30 years we'll still be making dye. Yeah. But we absolutely know that we will be impacting lives and creating wealth. And what that looks like continues to change. I mean, my Abby Research is our first foray into a service-based industry where we're not making a widget. This is the first time we're making and selling ideas. So it's a massive leap for us entrepreneurially, but
Yeah.
mission wise, it is not a leap at all. It's completely
Mhm.
within alignment.
That's awesome. When you said that mission, did that come, who designed that mission for your, because I love the fact you reminded me of when we have mission statements for organizations and businesses and nonprofits that sometimes we forget. I use this example a lot with families I work with. What is your family mission statement? Like, let's come up with one. So how did you all design yours?
Oh, I mean, this is one of the things with doing it really young. Like my dad came up with it and now we just all live it and embody it. And when my brother and I went through the process of taking over, we did an intellectual exercise of like, okay, let's try to rewrite it. And at the end of it, we're like, no, this still resonates with us. We still really love this. But no, I think I was 8 when he came up with that. So I didn't have a lot of input.
Yeah. Didn't have a lot of input, but boy, at 8, and what a role it has played in your life. You can tell. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kristen, how do you go about, let's go there with the idea that someone who's just like you were bringing up the example that I don't know how to be empathetic. It's not in my DNA. I don't know how to do it. Like, what are some strategies or things you could just to simplify? Like, what do you tell someone who feels like they can't do this? Or it's not in their personality or all the things that come out about I don't know how to be a softie, right? Because empathy and softie go hand in hand for a lot of people. Or
for sure.
Or there's a fear based on if they're in the corporate world, like if I show empathy to if they're manager, how's it going to look for my production? I think, yeah.
Well, the first thing I do, and this is thank you, my social work training, I ask them what they think empathy is. And so when they come back to me and they usually talk about like emotions of some fashion, I'm like, okay, cool. So we have a lot to thank emotions researchers for. They've taught us a lot about what empathy feels like in our bodies. The problem is that that they've then kind of owned the empathy narrative, and the emotions are only one piece. So let's talk about some other things. So if I'll do an example of a manager comes to us and says, I don't do that touchy-feely stuff. I'll be like, okay, cool. Tell me why. And kind of unpack it. And, with some of those people, it's like, well, if you don't do the touchy-feely stuff, a lot of research is telling me that you're leaving probably about 60% of your talent on the table, which means that you're wasting about 60% of people's paychecks. Replacement costs for people before COVID were about 150% of their paycheck. Now it's around 210% of their paycheck. So do you want to look at the bottom line? Let's do that. And let's talk about what makes people feel valued. Let's talk about what makes them be productive. If they need me to talk about people as widgets, I can. And then we can start going from there. If they come to me and they're like, I don't love the touchy-feely stuff, but I know I need it, which is often more popular these days. I know I need to do it. I don't know how. Then we start with, okay, tell me about yourself. Tell me your story. And I dig into them a little bit usually. And what always comes out is that there's a part of them that's very important to them that is not a part of their work life. So they have a parent that they're taking care of, for instance, or they spend all of their time on weekends fishing. Like that's the joy. That's the core of who they are. And I'm like, okay, how many people that you work with know that? Well, I don't know. Okay. Well, if you knew that somebody in your office is also a master fisherman, would you want to know that? And they're usually like, yeah. Okay. Well, then that's what we're talking about. I'm not just talking about empathy around the hard stuff. I'm talking about empathy is just understanding that different people are different and that your worldview is just as valid as somebody else's. We start there. Then once you understand somebody's worldview, you don't approve of it. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to do anything with it. Then you can make an informed decision about how you want to interact with them. The way that we're doing it right now is we're basing everything on tolerations, and we flatten people into one thing about them, so it's that's the Muslim girl that works in my office, or that's the vegetarian that lives next door. Okay. Those things are true, but they are not the whole truth. And more than likely they're just factual. They're not even true, and they're not rich and everything we can use it. So, okay. So what are they besides a Muslim woman? What are they besides a vegetarian or a vegan or there's other parts. We're all many, many things at once. So it's usually, I always start with questions because the real key is to be curious about yourself. Most people don't even realize how much they're carrying around within them that impacts how they live their day-to-day lives.
Well, questions are, the curiosity is what I think everything has to be about. So for you to start that way, right? First of all, a lot of these folks haven't actually gotten a chance to even be asked to look at themselves, right? Managers and people who are high up, CEOs. I mean, because they are, when you carry that leadership role, I feel like there's been a lot of prejudice to be an empathetic leader, right? In the past, it's been frowned upon. And B, now that we've gotten to this level, then they also haven't been asked some of these crucial questions about their lives out, like you're saying, outside of their role as a work person.
Yeah.
So that's critical.
And many of us, and a lot of some of this is generational, and some of it is, a lot of it's to do with where you grew up and your privilege and kind of everything else. But we, even at the most kind of, as my husband would say, like artsy fartsy, airy fairy colleges and schools, we're not actually taught empathy or emotional intelligence. We may pick it up. We may listen to podcasts. We may do our own work around Brené Brown. We may really, we may do these things, but there's not, I mean, MBA programs are now starting to do it, right? And there's some movements within formal education to kind of bring this in, but even it's all fits and starts. We're all just learning how to do it formally. And so we have to take it upon ourselves. But yeah, like when I teach this, when we do workshops and keynotes around this topic, one of the things I always do is put up, if I have visuals, I can put up a picture of my husband and I, and I'll say, what do you think about us? Like, tell me about us. And I never, ever tell them that he's from Northern Ireland before I start talking. So they look at us. We're both dressed similar. We're both white. We present middle class. We both look intelligent because we have glasses. And that's a stereotype that people have. He's got a beard. He's shorter than me, but he's got a really friendly face. And they'll kind of give me all these things. And then I play a clip of him talking. And it's like, okay, well, obviously we're not from the same country. Our mothers are not from the same place. So if you just look at the two of us, you're going to assume we have probably a really harmonious marriage, which we do. And we grew up in, similar circumstances. I'll be like, okay, well, I am a North American Protestant raised in idyllic suburbia. My husband is a Northern Irish Catholic raised during their Civil War. How do you think we see the world differently and we come to things differently? And I'm not even going to touch anything else besides those statements. How do we kind of do that and navigate through that? And it's the same with so many people that we work with. If you flatten people to the one thing you know about them, it's super easy to just live in assumptions.
Totally.
Because it's an emotional safety mechanism, right? Like our brains say, oh, you look like me, you're safe. You are like me, you're safe. It's a tribal, like ancient hindbrain thing. So we have to overcome the hindbrain and say, okay, you don't look like me and you're probably still safe. Let's find out. Or you do look like me and you're not safe. Like we have to do it all.
Yeah. So it's fascinating. I love that you're bringing up visual ideas because the fact is, when we think about prejudices and biases, it is that very visual, right? Like it starts with that. So for you to share that like image when you do your work and to kind of let people understand and go through that exercise, I think is awesome.
I have a lot of fun. It's fun to talk about us. Our marriage is an example in inclusivity. So it's easy to use. It's easy to use my own life as an example.
Yes. So Kristen, you did bring up the word inclusivity. So can you go ahead and, because you are really, I love that you're simplifying life. I always think that when I explain empathy, I'm like, it's just about connecting with people at that raw level and just really feeling them out, and they feel you. And that's, and I love that you even broke it down to what it really is. And so can you talk about inclusivity? Because here's my big concern, Kristen. I feel like some organizations have done the work in the last year of really helping their companies, helping their organizations go inward, look at the prejudices, look at the biases, look at how they impact things. But there are some people who did the check mark, right? They did the trainings. They didn't have that true, like, flipping over everything and having their personnel like really go inward and really do the digging that's required to do this. So can you share what inclusivity, when you look at what does that word mean? What does it look like? And how do we get people to start, even though maybe your job's not telling you need to do it? Let's go back to how you do need to do this work.
I would be delighted to. So first of all, inclusivity is a perpetual goal. We will never be fully inclusive because as humans, we are always learning, changing, and evolving. And all organizations, relationships, companies are made up of people who are changing, learning, and evolving. So if we can understand that everything's a journey and not a destination, in like, I understand it sounds Hallmark cardy, and I get that, but like, you really got to live, you got to embrace that. We are going to be the most inclusive we can be at every given time, which means we always have room to grow. We always have room to unlearn something we've done poorly and relearn it in another direction. So that's a framework that I would encourage people to kind of really think about, because within that, inclusivity is creating environments where everybody can be their full selves and you are never forced to be a caricature. Mm-hmm. You are never forced to be the thing you have been flattened to at the table. So there's lots of tables that I'm invited to because I'm a woman. And because I'm a woman COO and because I'm under 40, that makes me, I don't know, like some sort of unicorn to some people. Oh my gosh, and I've got the PhD and the whole nine. Yeah. But if I show up to that table and all they want to hear about is being a woman COO under 40, that's not an inclusive environment. I haven't been invited to inclusivity. If they want to also, if it comes up in conversation and it's okay, but they also want me to bring the fact that like, I am obsessed with Marvel and like love Marvel comics, movies, and I write fan fiction. Can I bring that to the table? Can I bring my chronic pain to the table? Can I bring my cross-cultural marriage to the table? Can I bring that I've worked and loved with a lot of adolescent addicts, and many of my brother's friends have died by suicide throughout the last several years, either overdoses or intentional? Can I bring all that to the table? Then that's inclusive. If I can only bring the gender bit of me, if I can only do that, then that's not inclusive. And we see this a lot, especially with people of color. They're the tick box exercise, right? Like, oh, I got a Black woman on my board. We're good. Cool. Yes. Well, what if she doesn't want to be there as the Black woman? What if she wants to be there as the mom or the artist or what have you? So essentially what inclusivity is creating environments where people get to decide what they bring to the table. You don't decide it for them. And so that creates more, I mean, if we want to do all of the markers of organizational health, right? Like heterogeneous, inclusive organizations are the ones that are the most innovative, the most healthy, the highest employee retention, everything. It ticks every box, because as humans, we're meant to live in complicated tribes. We're not meant to exist just with people like us. It's not quite how, it's what we think we want, but it's not how we function best. And so we have to create complicated tribes, which means we have to accept that people are complicated, messy people and allow them to show up as such.
Yeah. I love that you said complicated tribes, right? Is that what you said? Mm-hmm. It's true. You're right. We have been conditioning ourselves for a long time. And it's also been the story of history that we kind of migrate towards. And then do you remember back in the discussions of the tossed salad versus the mixed green salad, and like, God, I remember all of that.
Yeah. America's a melting pot. No, it's not. And we don't want it to be.
No. Do you remember those discussions? I clearly remember when I started my undergrad in that discussion. I was like, dear God, do I have to really, no, this is not how this goes. So for you to really unpack the idea that the complexities behind the individual person and communities and global, what it is the complexities and the intricacies are what makes us fascinating. That is why we evolved to be humans, right? There's a difference. I always say we're still a mammalian, but there's a part of us that why we don't always migrate. We do have to fight that urgency to migrate to people that are similar. look
Yeah.
the same, act the same, whatever it is, right? You have to fight that urge.
And there is safety with that. Like there's, you know, I mean, my relationship with my husband works because we have all these differences, but we also love travel and video games and the same television, you know, so there's a balance here. I'm not saying we immediately go and form a ton of relationships with people who are so completely different from us. We have like the lack of commonality is more than the commonality. I'm not saying that. Frequently we have more commonality with people than we, you know, believe or see or whatever, but I think organizations of sameness are mediocrity. It's fine. It'll get along. Corporate America has proven us to that. It'll do fine. But if we want world-changing greatness, paradigm shifting, cultural rewriting greatness, we need heterogeneity and not homogeneity. We need complicated.
Do you think that also increased the actual happiness, joy quotient when you see this happening?
I think so, because when you are fully yourself and you feel safe and alive to be fully yourself, all of your endocrine systems are firing and you're at your hormonally happiest. So that's kind of like when people get, you know, people get run down is when they don't feel valued, they don't feel seen, they don't feel understood. All those kind of things. I'm asked a lot right now to talk about like why people are leaving the workforce so much and all that other things. And one of the questions I'm asking employers all the time is, so who left? And they'll give me names. And I'm like, no, who left? Who left? What, and not just what did they bring to the table in terms of your bottom line or your ROI? What did they bring to the table in terms of your culture? What humans have left? And it does it, if they don't know how to answer that, it's not surprising to me, you know, so, which is completely fair. And like you've said, we promoted, especially in corporate America, we promoted a whole lot of people as managers and called them leaders. And that's not fair to them. We didn't equip them to actually lead. We equipped them to manage. And you know, that's not fair. And very rarely did we actually equip them to manage, if we're all honest.
Yeah. Yes.
And small business is the same way. Like even, you know, great entrepreneurships. I mean, like we struggle here. We've got 30-ish people in the building and the constant creating of an environment for people to bring their full selves. Like I literally teach this for a living and it's still something we struggle with all the time to do and be and everything, because keeping people happy sounds like a low priority when you say it, when you're looking at how do I make payroll. And we've been taught for so long that that's a dichotomy. And instead I can sit there and be like, no, those are the same thing. We just said the same thing. If I can't keep people happy, I can't make payroll either. So what does this look like? How do I keep doing this? What is this puzzle today?
But you just said it. You have to consistently rewire, retrain your brain to not. It's going to go there. It's just, it's going to go there. And how do you, like I work with families and kids and I just always tell the parents, like, you literally are going to have the thoughts. You just have to stop and take whatever you need to do to get in that moment. And then right then the neurons are going to refire in a different existence the minute that you stop and just pause.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do react, and that's okay. You get a chance to go back and you get to do some repair. It's just that when we kind of go on autopilot, I used the word autopilot this week a lot in one of my presentations because it is autopilot again, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you turn into these problems. What happened for a while, I felt like last year we took ourselves off of autopilot. Many of us have gone back to being on autopilot again, and that's why this discussion of inclusivity and what it means is so powerful, right? That it has to be done.
I mean, I obviously agree. Yes, completely true.
Yeah. So how do you, because you don't see them as you don't see empathy, inclusivity like this. You see them like this. So can you talk about how we can empower people to start looking at it with that lens?
That's the $64,000 question, right? So, I mean, so my answer is you hire me to come and do a workshop. No, just kidding. First of all, we are very clear about our definitions of empathy and inclusivity. And the other thing is that I don't know how you do inclusivity without curiosity and empathy, because like I said, you got to, everybody's got to bring their whole selves. So how do you find out their whole selves without empathy?
Yeah.
So it's, like a cycle. So I think, teaching people to ask questions about themselves and others around them, like a couple practical tips we always give to organizations. So if you're in an office environment in particular, excuse me, I have to cough. I apologize to your sound person. So whether that's virtual or in person or whatever, one of the things we say is get a list of all the international holidays, all of them. So don't just know when American Labor Day is, know when Diwali is, know when Ramadan is, know when Australia Day is, because there is an insane likelihood that somebody in your organization has a connection to those days. So make it a party, make it a something. And that means you give people an opportunity to be curious about something that seems fairly innocuous. Like, oh, okay, cool. I'm learning what Ramadan is. And then you find out that there's 4 people in your organization that celebrate it. Okay, cool. Do you want to teach it? Like, do you want to tell us about it? No? Okay, no problem. I'll get the information from Google. You don't need to do this labor, but like you kind of get that kind of stuff. So you open it up simply that way. This is one of the things that Bring Your Kid to Work Day can really help with, actually, is like you also get to see, you get to see people as humans. That's what Zoom has done, as terrible as it is in so many ways. But like we see people's kids, we see their cats, we see their wall decorations. We know, anybody that watches my videos knows that I love Funko dolls and I love books. And these are important things. So I think there's lots of ways to cultivate the curiosity for your organization. So you help people get into that rhythm.
I love that you simplified it and just brought up the international holiday calendar. The old district that I used to live in has decided this year specifically that they were going to really open up to having some holidays, because they're looking at the population, the differences, the different ethnicities that exist. So they have included some of them to be an actual holiday.
Amazing.
So I hear you saying that it is the idea behind looking at. You also reminded me at a level when some districts, I'm thinking about education in general for children, like some of them had multicultural day, where at least, even if people always thought it was about being a diverse school. I actually always thought it was culture doesn't always mean countries relate. Culture just means our American culture. I had someone talk about our American food and what amazing, like if you really look at how much of our food is really intrinsically American, it's not awesome, right? And where the history behind it. Why I say this to you is because, do you feel like that's a missing link in our puzzle, is how we're educating empathy and inclusivity in our early childhood and our childhood years?
Yes. So the example, I love that question so much. The example I always use in terms of this is that I grew up in suburban Philadelphia in a school district that definitely had money and resources and happened to have a pretty large international population, because there was a bunch of pharmaceutical companies around us that recruited people. So I also, I got off for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The school was closed those days. And there was people that came in that taught us, we had whole Asian food weeks in social studies. We got taught how to eat with chopsticks, and we got taught how to say the words on the menus in all the various, restaurants around town. We got taught how to make quesadillas, and we got taught how to say Mexico, and we got taught how to say those things. So then 2 hours north of me, not even an hour and a half, same state, all my field trips, by the way, were to the Betsy Ross House to learn how the first flag was made, to Independence Hall, to battlefields. 2 hours north is a massive mining community, huge labor, unions, whole nine. At no point in time, my friends there that grew up there didn't get Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur off. They went to Philadelphia once, but they did mine tours and union history every single year. That's a 90-minute difference. So then I show up to undergrad in Kentucky, and I assume, as the naive 17-year-old, that everybody's had my high school experience. So we're hitting Rosh Hashanah, and I'm like, why is no one talking about Rosh Hashanah? Why doesn't anyone here know what matzah is? Oh, I can't get, oh, this is weird. Okay. And yeah, like I had a friend who told me she had never talked to somebody who was a real, in her words, real life Jewish person. So when one of my friends from high school called, she got on the phone with him because she was like, I really want to know what a Jew sounds like. I was like, oh my God. But at the same time, okay, thank you for that curiosity.
Yeah.
Like I judged her so much for it, but honestly, like that
But
kind of
you've never been exposed, like for her context.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, Kristen, because sometimes I also we all hold judgment for people but they've never had the privilege of having the experience, right?
No.
Right?
Yeah, like I have a friend who told me when I moved to Texas, I was in Central Texas for 5 years. They very sheepishly asked me what Broadway was. And I kind of explained it. She goes, okay, so my whole life I thought it was one building and all the shows were on different floors. Yeah. And I laughed because that was hilarious. And I was like, I'm not laughing at you. That's just I started going to theater at 3. Like, this is my life. Yes. You who have never left the state of Texas, how are you supposed to know that it's not that? And so I have been so lucky and so privileged to live around the world and live in these different cultures and eat this different food and meet these different people. But the internet is a beautiful thing to bring that into us too. So we just have to use it strategically instead of as a fear-mongering machine that we carry around in our pockets. We have to use it strategically to broaden our horizons instead of narrow them.
I just love that you're bringing up internet and social media for good. You know, I actually think the power of social media influencers, like in a positive way, could really, and I'm seeing it left and right, if we use it to have these types of conversations around the fact that elimination of our personal biases and our personal prejudice, all of it, and that work we have to go to do inward then can go outward, right? We keep having these conversations. You have to do the work. Well, what does that look like? You know? And so I am glad you brought up that every child has a different experience, like 90 minutes, and you're sharing that example of how different it was for that infrastructure, like that infrastructure and that community and how that experience looks different.
Yeah, like I had no idea that there was mining in Pennsylvania, I think, until I was in college. Like I was taught the entire history of Pennsylvania up to the Revolution, and then they never taught us anymore. And so I was like, oh, literally all of cool. I know nothing. Amazing. Sounds great. So, but I can rattle you off the entire history of the American Civil War, the American Revolution from beginning to end.
We did spend a lot of time on the Revolution in school, didn't we? I'm like thinking, while we're talking about this, I have the actual AP, like I have that history book right now in my mind, and think about how many pages how many months we focused on that revolution.
Somebody told me the other day,
the details behind the War of 1812, right? Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, while we're talking about this, yet we never got into the actual nitty gritty stories that still, if we look at the archives or like people who have done these amazing research-based, they'd have the history there, and that could truly write these books in a very much of a people anthology.
For sure. And the other thing too is we've taught, one of the things that we're doing at Abbey Research a lot right now is unlearning what we were taught. Yeah. So a great example of this is the Hamilton musical. And so there is a lot. I love Hamilton. I can sing every single word. I've seen it many times. I adore it with my whole soul. So I'm coming from this place, but it is 0% critical of George Washington. 0. George Washington is, like, for instance, we say he had wooden teeth. He did not have wooden teeth. He had a set of dentures made from his slaves' teeth that he forcibly removed from their mouths to make teeth for himself. That is true. At the same time that he was an incredible leader whose decision to step down after 2 terms set a precedent that saved America from autocracy. Both of those things are true.
And I'm glad you're saying, let's look at the other part, right?
It has to be messy.
Yes.
Humans are humans. Like Thomas Jefferson was a genius who raped his slave and called it a relationship. Both of those things are true. And so that's what we have to, that's a big part of inclusivity and empathy as well, is understanding that nobody is a caricature. History is not a caricature. History is not flattened. So therefore, the people you love are not either.
Yeah.
People get to be complicated, messy, contradictory beings because you are too.
You summed it up so beautifully. I one of the slides today that I had was let go of the perfectionism. It was for parents, right? As we're thinking about getting back to school, that we want the perfect environment. So a lot of this is about perfectionism. We and leaders in specific, we want them to be these perfect beings. So when we find out about some of the things that they have, I'm like, they're human. They're human. You know?
Yeah. My theology tells me there's been one deity that has ever walked the earth. That's it. The rest of us are human. So,
yeah.
yeah.
And don't you find that if we start to have this everyone is human discussion, no matter what role we play and where we can start to shed these layers of social obligation, social construct.
I mean, I'm banking my life on it. So, yeah.
Literally.
I mean, yeah, I'm banking my life on it. So I hope so.
Yes. Chris, we have a few minutes left, and I've just been so curious from the get-go about your book collection, because I love some books. And so if I ever showed you my other room, it's crazy. Right now they're in a bunch of bins, but eventually I just want to put them on some shelves. But can you share do you have any particular book that really draws you in, or any that you would say to the audience, like if we had to give them some homework, what would you say to tell them that you should definitely pick up while we're having this discussion?
Oh my gosh, could I? So one of the ones I always say to pick up if you haven't is to read To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. It's a classic for a reason, and it's one of my favorites, and it is the basis of our work in a lot of ways. So To Kill a Mockingbird is one. I am working my way through this book right now. Actually, it's called The Cooking Gene by Michael Twitty, and it's a journey through African-American culinary history in the Old South.
Wow.
And I am loving it. It's won a ton of awards. And I work in Charleston, South Carolina a lot, and a lot of it takes place in Charleston. So I'm really resonating with it. But yeah, what other ones? I mean, I really love Do Better by Rachel Ricketts. I love Mediocre by Ijemio Ulo. We have
many. I know.
We have a book review channel because I love them so much. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. You have a book review channel. Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. So,
if you head to our YouTube, you'll see it linked. And our YouTube is just the same name of my company, Abby Research. That's the YouTube. So. Okay.
So everyone, you can tune in and get the book reviews, because there's so much out there, as you know, in this field of social, positive psychology, and sociology. There's a lot out there. So I know a lot of our audience, as they listen or in general want to become more empowered, you kind of want to help them. So I love that you have this book review.
Yep. Anytime.
Great. Awesome. Kristen, thank you so much. Everyone, here's the YouTube link.
It's spelled a little bit differently. If I just go ahead and do that really quick right now, and I'll see if Roxy could, your delightful, wonderful person, could put that up there. But yeah, or you can email me, which I know this has been going on throughout the lovely conversation that we've had. I've seen it underneath there. Oh, yeah. Getting a hold of me is not a challenge at all.
Okay. Oh, there we go. The YouTube. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. God, we love our tech geniuses.
Oh, she's awesome. For a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
All righty. Kristen, thank you so much for this powerful, powerful conversation about how you just really kept it simple to say, anyone can do this. It's just a matter of, again, everything's about mindset. The more and more I look at everything, choice and mindset, right? Which is, yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Oh, you too. Everyone, have a great week ahead. And our conversation reminded us today to keep it simple and to really just take a look at yourself in a lens so that you can start doing the work you were meant to do in the outside world. Thanks, and have a great week, everyone.
Bye, everybody.